let's keep it there, Corey, on the Jake Paul fight. Jake Paul knocks out Mike Perry, just dominates him really from start to finish, beats him up. The size was a huge factor in that fight. Jake is, look, they both weighed in right around 200 pounds, but Jake is a naturally bigger guy. He's naturally heavier handed. I know Mike Perry is a bare knuckle boxing brawler, but when it comes to traditional boxing, Jake is just better. I tell everybody that wants to speak negatively about Jake Paul, the one thing you have to say about him is that he takes his craft very seriously, and he does have real power in that right hand. And you saw him batter Mike Perry all around the ring in Tampa on Saturday night. Just, I guess, your impressions of Jake Paul racking up another professional boxing win.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what he should have done in that fight, and frankly, what we should have expected him to do. I think that Perry was, at the very least, an interesting replacement. There was some curiosity there because, Perry as a personality, B, his ability to take a shot, his resilience, and then that just sort of X factor, like, hey, this guy's a little bit out there, maybe something weird will happen. But logically speaking, when you've watched Perry and how he boxes in a bare knuckle environment, like that just doesn't translate to gloved boxing. And like those are two very different things. You could be an exceptional bare knuckle boxer and not great at traditional boxing. Like in most cases, I think like a high level gloved boxer can move over to bare knuckle boxing and do well, but sometimes they don't. It didn't work out for Paulie Malignaggi in a one fight scenario. And in Perry's case, it wasn't a true bare knuckle fight necessarily, but he had a fight in that kind of Triller hybrid trigon against Michael Seals, who at that point was a couple of fights removed from being a genuine world caliber light heavyweight. And he did well in that fight, right? And so that kind of shows you the difference. Like if you put Perry against someone who's at Jake Paul's level, or frankly, even better in a bare knuckle environment, he probably wins. But if you put gloves on him and where technique and strategy plays a totally different role, he's just not going to win. His hands weren't up. He just didn't have any offense really to offer in that fight whatsoever.
What I like about Jake Paul in this sense is that I like a guy that keeps his career moving. And look, Jake could have easily taken the next few months off, continued to build towards that November date against Mike Tyson, which is going to draw a lot of eyeballs, taken on a less risky opponent, or just promoted the fight and promoted a card in general and not put himself at the top of it. But he wanted to keep the trains moving. He wanted to put on a big event, and he did that. And by doing that, you give a lot of opportunity for the people on your undercard. You give another opportunity to Amanda Serrano, who had a blowout knockout win as the co-main. You give another opportunity to Shadaysha Green, who got back into her winning ways with a win on the undercard. You were supposed to give an opportunity to Ashton Silva. It didn't go that way for him, but it was a opportunity on paper. So I like that. You do a big crowd, probably do a decent gate. I have no idea what number it did on pay-per-view. Again, that's kind of the question I would follow up with, Corey, is, look, there was some buzz for Mike Perry. I think Perry helped with that. He's a talker. People know him from bare knuckle. But have you noticed any decline in the interest in these events? Like, in other words, have people kind of become numb to Jake beating the bejesus out of these ex-UFC, ex-mixed martial artists? Because he keeps racking up wins. Like, he's calling out, what was it, Alex Pereira? Is he the UFC champion? He's calling him out after. Like, I don't know. I doubt UFC would ever let Alex do that. But, in the event that it ever happened, he would get knocked out too, because mixed martial arts training is not the same as boxing training. So do you get any sense that there's a numbness developing from boxing fans to these types of events?
I think for us, there probably is, right? Because I think that like you and I, we've written this story, you way more so than me, but you've probably written this story like 12 times, right? Yeah. About like what's happening next for Jake Paul. You and I have done this segment 20 times by now, right? So, and I think we're probably struggling to find new storylines which contribute to that buzz. But when you look at the arena, it's sold out. When I look at kind of, like fan pages, like on Reddit or on Facebook groups or whatnot, the median fan, they're still discussing this kind of with the same fervor that they were before. And fighters aren't always right when it comes to their own popularity or their buzz. But Jake Paul and his team, like, they've shown throughout his career, inside and outside of boxing, that their thumb is on the pulse of how popular they are, where things are moving. And clearly they feel like this thing that they've been doing, beating up MMA fighters, it's not old yet. They must still be making money off of this. He clearly is still making money off of this. And it's gone on longer than I anticipated it to, not in terms of the public getting tired of it, but I just thought at a certain point, this stage of his career would just kind of run its course, that he would move on to trying to maneuver his way into the world rankings. When he was facing the kind of club level fighters, the real pro boxers, he was taking that angle. I thought maybe that would be opening the door to something else. But instead, this Tyson thing pops up. And now Jake, like, he may still have aspirations to win a world title and do that thing too. But I think that he's enjoying, for this period of time, to be in this type of circuit, the not the sideshow, but the kind of the event circuit, fighting other MMA fighters, doing that type of thing. Clearly, it's not affecting his pocketbook yet, even if we're tired of talking about it, or at least can't come up with a new angle to frame this within.
That's the thing too. Like you mentioned, the saturation of coverage for Jake has been intense over the last few years. I mean, I go back to 2021. I think I named him Breakout Boxer of the Year for SI. A year later, he was on the cover of the magazine. Like, he's got a great story. I do think he is doing good things in boxing. He is definitely, to our previous point, creating opportunities for other fighters. It's just, I'm having a hard time finding new reasons to talk about him, to write about him, to do all the things that have to do with him. So I think that is the biggest problem that's out there. Now, he does have that fight scheduled in November with Mike Tyson. After that, I'm interested to see what path Jake decides to take. Now, you had Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. on that undercard. Looked absolutely dreadful in a 6-round win over some guy named Uriah Hall. Don't know what the point of that was. First fight in about 3 years for Chavez Jr. But then you had Gilberto Mendoza of the WBA hopping on social media and saying he would love to see Jake against Chavez for a title. Now, unclear what title that would be, right? Like, is he talking about the full cruiserweight title in the WBA organization? I certainly hope not. Is he talking about a secondary minor belt? Maybe. Even then, putting aside Jake, Chavez hasn't earned that. Chavez has done nothing to earn a cruiserweight championship. So I am interested to see if after this Tyson fight, if he uses Chavez to potentially springboard him back into that mainstream world title picture.
It's fascinating. And I think that, like, clearly having Chavez on the undercard is that kind of that backup plan, maybe, or not necessarily a backup plan, but setting up for Jake's future beyond Mike Tyson, assuming that fight does happen, when we think if Tyson doesn't have another medical emergency that stops this. Yeah, that would be a path in. And you and I have talked on this show about some of the wacky names that have wound up in the rankings in the past. And quite often they are in the WBA's rankings as well. And could you not see a potential path? Like, let's say that fight happens at heavyweight and Jake Paul beats Chavez. Jake Paul winds up in the WBA heavyweight rankings, and they make like Jake Paul versus Manuel Char for a version of the heavyweight title. Is that impossible, given things that we've seen before, given the amount of influence that Jake Paul has, and, given the propensity that the WBA has to wacky business? I don't think it is. I'm not saying I'm promoting that or want that to happen, but I think it's a very real possibility. That's a direction that Jake Paul could angle this. Like, he's that influential at this point that everyone in boxing, to a degree, is the plankton eating off the whale that is Jake Paul right now.
Good, as a good way to put it, the plankton eating off the whale. I kind of like that.